It was on Easter Sunday in 1722 when the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen discovered what in history might be one of the most isolated island nations ever be discovered. The Rapa Nui lived in isolation, 1,200 nautical miles from the closest neighbor. And he found a culture that had developed on its own culture, its own way of life, its own language. And to this day, you can see their fingerprints all over the island. You can go and you can see the moai, these great big heads carved from stone that have stood during the centuries as if they're guardians watching over the island. You can see those petroglyphs, all these shapes carved in stone, thousands of them all over the island, putting before people things that ought not be forgotten. And you can read the Rongo Rongo script. It's their writing, not written on paper, but carved in wood that we have to this day, sharing memories to be passed through the ages. At least that's what we think. Because there's no one alive who can read that. You see, when the Rongo Rongo script was discovered, there was a missionary that said there are all kinds of islanders who could read it, but the 19th century was not kind to the Rapa Nui. Disease, the slave trade, and emigration meant that 94% of its population dwindled away. There's one period of time where in less than a decade, the population of the island goes from in the thousands to right about 100 people. And all the people who could read that, all the people who were able to share with others the memories preserved in that text, they were swallowed up by the grave. I mean, to this day, you can still see the moai hovering over the island. You can still see the petroglyphs, and you can read the Rongo Rongo script, but the mysteries they contain are lost, swallowed up by the grave. Here we sit 303 Easter Sundays later, and we seem to live in a completely different world. Because today, Easter Island is under the control of the country of Chile. And if you want, you can fly there in a fraction of the time it used to take to sail there. You can take out your phone, you can look up Easter Island on Google Maps, and you can zoom in. It seems like we live in a different world, but I tell you what, that graveyard art there, it would beg to differ. It doesn't matter in what age in which you live. The grave has this amazing power to swallow us up. I mean, how long would it take? How long do you think it would take for our world, our culture, our way of life to go the way of the Rapa Nui? A war? Some kind of plague, some kind of disease, some kinds of famine? If it took our population and dwindled us down to the hundreds? How long before a digital footprint is erased? How long before the dams break and lands flood? How long before there are fires and before buildings crumble and before our whole infrastructure disappears before our eyes as nature reclaims its land? How long would it be until everything you see around you would be left to be discovered by some archaeologists hundreds of years later? How long would that take? And me? For me and my accomplishments and my life to be forgotten, none of that has to happen. This country can continue, our way of life can continue, our culture can continue. For me to be forgotten, the only thing that has to happen is for the clock to keep on ticking. Because as the grave comes, and as it swallows us up, it is amazing how quickly our accomplishments and all of our lives lived are just forgotten. And it doesn't take long, and the only thing left of a whole life lived are a few words, a name, and some dates carved in a rock out there. And there they'll stand for centuries, like modern moai, monuments to a person, a life, to memories that have long since been forgotten. That's how it works. And Job was no fool. He knew that. I mean, he, more than anyone, had reason to believe that his life would stand, would live past the grave. He was wealthy. He was well known. He was respected. He was devout. And yet, it's amazing how quick he lost it all. Do you remember the story? I mean, the devil just took him by the ankles. He flipped him upside down. He shook him out, right down to the change in his pockets. In a matter of moments, he lost his business. He lost his family. He lost everything. With fire from heaven, a great wind, raiders from the east, everything he had gone. And then he lost his health. And then his wife walked out on him. And then his friends came to pour salt on his wounds because they just had to know what it was he did that made God so mad that he would do this. And Job knew it wouldn't be long and the grave would swallow him up too. But he wanted this etched in stone. He wanted it written in a scroll, engraved in lead for everyone to remember. And here's what he wanted remembered. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. Do you see what Job wants remembered? It's not the name and the dates of his life. It's not a list of his accomplishments or his family and his friends. It's not his hopes and dreams. It's not because that stuff doesn't matter, but it's because those are the things that he could not count on. What he wanted remembered is this: I know that my Redeemer lives. Because that was the only thing he could count on and the only thing the grave couldn't take away from him. See, if you were an Old Testament Israelite, you had a relative, someone that in Hebrew they called a Goel. In English, we call it a redeemer. And that guy's job was to be the one you could count on. If something happened and you lost your ancestral lands, it was his job to buy it back so it stayed in the family. If something happened and you ended up being sold into slavery, it was his job to buy you back and set you free. If something happened and you were murdered, it was his job to avenge your death. He was the one you could count on when things got tough, to be there. Now, I don't know if Job had a Goel, but whatever the case, we don't hear anything about him in the book of Job. But he had one. And that's what he wanted inscribed. That's what he wanted remembered. Now, do you know what makes Job's story unique? The timing. But the substance, what happened, that happens to everybody. You see, at some point, we will lose all the same things. Our professions, our careers, our co-workers, our accomplishments, gone. Our family, our friends, the people we rely on, at some point, gone. Our health, our life, at some point, will be swallowed up by the grave like everyone else. At some point, it's going to happen. Life is going to flip us upside down, take us by the ankles, and shake us right down to the change in our pockets. And if it's not an economic downturn or downsizing, if it's not sickness or disease or disaster, it will be death itself. But make no mistake, what makes Job's story unique is not what happened, but how it happened. He didn't lose anything he wasn't going to lose anyways. And I think we know that. But isn't it funny how we live as if we don't? I mean, we know that our careers are not going to last forever. We know our professional lives and our accomplishments are not going to be there until Judgment Day. We get that. But isn't it funny how we put so much weight in it? We find our identity there and our self-worth. We know that our family can't always be there. Not in every situation. And even if they are there, they don't always know what to do. Sometimes they make it worse. And yet, isn't it funny how we rely so much on them, and sometimes weeks will go by without hardly giving a thought to a God who is always by our side? We know that at some point, we will be swallowed up by the grave too, just like everybody before us. And yet, isn't it funny how we live life without an eternal perspective? At times giving hardly a thought to what comes next, getting so wrapped up in the here and now. I mean, we know that all this is true. And yet, isn't it funny how all the things we know won't be there forever are exactly the things that we find ourselves counting on? You see, there's only one you can count on. And Job, he knew exactly who he was. And you had a chance to see that throughout Holy Week. You know, the Easter story, it kind of seems to start off like everybody else's story. That Jesus is a guy everybody relied on, but at the end of the day, he died just like everybody else, and the grave swallowed him up. I mean, on Easter morning, the women are going to the tomb, and what are they carrying in their hands? Burial spices. Because they fully expect to find a dead Jesus. Think of the disciples. They run to the tomb because they don't believe it. Think of the Emmaus disciples. They talk about Jesus as if he were a disappointment. Think about Mary Magdalene. She sits by that tomb and she cries tears that are always shed by tombs. Tears of anger and frustration and loss and confusion. But Job was right. He lives. In spite of everything you saw during Holy Week, in spite of his arrest and the beatings and the ridicule and the crucifixion and his death and his burial, he lived. In spite of the fact that nobody believed it, even his own followers. His disciples doubted it. The women go to the tomb expecting to find a dead Jesus. Peter and John run there, not believing what they see. Mary Magdalene looks at him and still doesn't recognize him. In spite of all of that, he lives. In spite of the fact that the anger and the wrath of a holy God over all of the history of humanity was focused on him at one point in time. In spite of the fact that every failure of you and every failure of mine, every single shortcoming we have was mounted upon him. In spite of the fact that the guilt of the human race was put on his shoulders and he was crushed like nobody's ever been crushed. He lives. The tomb was empty. He walked back out. And that changes everything. Because that means you've got one guy you can count on. Because he promised. And because he lives. And because he lives to keep his promise. And that's what Job held on to. Because do you know what Job wanted? He wanted vindication. He was sick of all the accusations of his friends. He looked forward to the day when he would stand there in the last day and he would be free of their accusations. And I don't know where Easter finds you, but doesn't that sound good? Being free from your regrets as you get together with family and friends and you grieve the time that you wasted, the arguments you had, the things you did that put up walls that didn't need to be there. Doesn't it sound good as you find yourself battling the same demons that are there every day or brand new ones coming around the corner you never saw coming? Doesn't that sound good as you live in a sin-sick world and you just find yourself tired? To know that he lives to keep his promises to you. That he paid the price to take away your sin and your failings so that on the last day there you will stand. I mean, Job can't wait. He looks past his problems, his suffering, the back and forth of his friends. He looks past all of human history to the very end, to the last day, where it's him and it's Jesus. And here's what he says. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he'll stand on the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes. I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. You look forward to that day when it would be him and Jesus and this whole new world he would create, and you're going to be there too. See, at some point, Jesus is going to come back, and our bones, that maybe by that time will be dust and ashes, will be reconstituted and reassembled. On that day, he's going to come back, and this skin of mine, that's the first to go, is going to cover my frame once more, and so will it for you. On that day, he's going to come back, and those eyes of ours that go blank in death are going to come alive with that spark of life, and there we will stand face to face with God, face to face with a Redeemer, the one that we had never laid eyes on, but has always been there, who wrapped his arms around you in the waters of baptism, who's spoken to you in his word time after time, who's heard every prayer, who's been with you every step, and who, when the time comes and it's your time to leave this world, will take you to be with him. Job couldn't wait. And he knew he would be there. Because it's what his Redeemer promised, and if you can't count on Redeemers, who can you count on? You know, nobody wants to be forgotten. I don't think that makes a Rapa Nui unique. I mean, how many cultures have tried to reach out past the grave, tried to leave something for the next generation to see? But do you know why we remember Job's words? It's not because of where they were written. It's not because they were etched in stone or engraved in lead or written in a scroll. The reason we remember Job's words is because they're true. It's what the words say. Our Redeemer lives. And because he lives, you and I are going to live too, even past the grave, risen just as he was. I mean, if that's what you have to look forward to, who cares about being remembered? As you leave here today, remember that you always have one you can count on. A Redeemer who lives, who keeps his promises, because that's what Redeemers do. Amen.